December of 2024, the German government collapsed. Olaf Scholz lost a no confidence vote, and there's elections coming up in February 2025. Now, Bloomberg and many major economists worldwide, mainstream economists, are saying that there are chronic issues with Germany's economy. Unemployment is 6.1% and growing. And the overall situation is just really dire. Scott, how did this happen? How did Germany go from one of the most prosperous economies in Europe, the biggest economy in Europe, to now one of the most crisis-ridden?
Well, remember, Germany achieved its status, its most recent status as the sort of the big boss of Europe under Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel ruled for a significant period of time. She had she was a stable hand on the helm, and the German economy was doing well. But everything, what made the German economy tick was cheap Russian gas. That's the reality. You have this cheap Russian gas, you're able to afford, all the, heating luxuries, etc. But now you can run the furnaces without bankrupting yourself. All the money you save, you can put back into your social programs, retirement programs, it's vacations, workers' paradise kind of stuff. But Merkel, like all politicians, outlived her usefulness, and she was replaced by, Olaf Scholz, who cobbled together this coalition of green politicians and others who started to do things to Germany that undermined their economy even before the special military operation. The shutting down of nuclear power was a big initiative that research, shutting down coal plants, trying to transition into green power, wind power, etc. All of this was happening, and there was problems in the German economy adjusting to this. But again, as long as they had cheap Russian gas, they could still move forward. But the United States was against cheap Russian gas because we viewed that as a potential economic weapon for Russia that could be used to put pressure on Germany to do things, et cetera, et cetera. Plus, secretly, we wanted to be the supplier of energy to Europe for us to benefit economically, for us to have that leverage. We can't let the Russians have energy leverage over Europe. We need to have it. And then Germany, when the special military operation began in February, Germany signed on to not only sanctioning Russia, but to take the lead in, being the European lead in supporting Ukraine. And both of these turned out to be extraordinarily expensive and just bad for Germany. The sanctioning, blew back the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline by the United States. They haven't admitted it, but I think the consensus is the United States, if they didn't do it themselves, were directly involved in it. That cut down the gas. The United States now is selling gas to Germany at 3 to 5 times the amount that they would have paid. Things become prohibitive. The industries start to shut down. Ukraine, money is pouring in there. Meanwhile, in Germany, you have a Ukrainian refugee problem that's coming in that highlights an already, politically divisive, immigration issue with Middle East immigrants, North African immigrants flooding into Central Europe, including Germany, and creating, problems. And I think the combination of, a collapsing economy, this failed foreign policy that is, stripping money away from Germany to a Ukrainian cause that even the Germans themselves have trouble fully supporting. I mean, I think it was the fall of 2022, winter of 2022, the German military barracks where Ukrainians were being trained had to tell the Ukrainians, you can't post Nazi, you can't wear neo-Nazi symbols, you can't sing Nazi songs, you can't give Nazi salutes, you can't do it. You'll be sent home if you do this. This is the problem. I mean, people like to ignore this, but literally the Ukrainian military is composed of Nazis, people who support Stepan Bandera, sing songs of the glory of Stepan Bandera, and give Nazi salutes and wear Nazi symbology. So this was problematic for the Germans as well. But it was the economic collapse that was causing the biggest problems for Scholz. But I think the straw that broke the camel's back was the immigration. And in particular, I think all you need is one horrible event, and I think the car that drove through the Christmas market in Magdeburg was the straw that broke the camel's back. And the interesting thing is everybody expected Scholz's government to collapse, but they thought that I think the guy's name is Werz, W-E-R-Z, the head of the CPD, I don't know, Christian, maybe CDP, Christian Democratic Party. They thought he was going to be, and he's a hardcore anti-Russian, support the Ukraine conflict. And they said, he's going to be the next guy. After the Magdeburg incident, it's Alternative for Deutschland that's running, in the lead. And the interesting thing about Alternative for Deutschland is not only the policies they have towards, the conflict in Ukraine, which is to unplug and get out and not do anything, not to support Ukraine in this. But they said, we're going to withdraw from the European Union as well. And if Germany withdraws from the European Union, that's the end of the European Union. And I think that this is sort of the situation we're seeing throughout all of Europe. We're starting to see, political issues of this magnitude. France, Macron's in a lot of trouble too. We had a collapse of the French government. He doesn't want to acknowledge that the parliament was won by, a majority of people who are opposed to what he's doing in Ukraine. So he continues to create minority governments ruled by prime ministers that, they can't rule because they don't have consensus support. And it just makes things even worse. There was a period of time a couple of weeks ago where Macron had to go on TV and challenge the French people and say, I will not resign. Stop asking for my resignation. I will see out my full term. But you don't make those statements on TV unless you're under pressure to resign and you're feeling that pressure. And that's the truth about Macron. Let's look at Romania. Any talk about NATO troops going into Ukraine, the reality is that the springboard will be Romania, Romanian ports, Romanian airfields. Romania just elected a president who won the election, who said, I want to make it all zero. I want to zero this thing out. I don't want to have any involvement in Ukraine, and I don't want to have any involvement in NATO. Now, the intelligence services of Romania, at the behest of their Western masters, intervened into the courts and tried to make the case that the presidential election had to be nullified because of Russian interference. And the courts agreed. And so they nullified that. There will be a new election for the president. But now the newspapers have come back and said there was nothing there. The allegations of Russian interference, there was no evidence to sustain that. What we thought was Russian interference wasn't Russian interference. And the bottom line is this president-elect won the election fair and square. But no, now they're buying time for a new election. They're going to try and beat him out. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that, but what happens to Romania when you have a president that says, we're done, we're finished, we're not doing this anymore? What happens, another example is Georgia. We've been trying to get a second front opened up against Russia and Georgia by, empowering, pro-Western elements of Georgian society who were receiving money from the United States, from Germany, from Europe to create these non-governmental organizations who were carrying out a soft power coup against the Georgian Dream Party. The ruling party has been ruling since 2012. The the idea was, the feeling was that Georgia Dream was sympathetic to Russia, largely because of its founder, Bidzina Ivanishvili, is a Georgian billionaire who made his money in the Russian economy. And so the feeling was that he was beholden to Russia, etc. No, the fact of the matter is that Georgia Dream isn't a pro-Russian party; it's a pro-Georgian party, but it supports, very conservative values. It's not sympathetic to gays or transgendered at all, and it supports the church, etc. Sort of the exact opposite direction that the United States and Europe was trying to take Georgia in an effort to break the back of the conservative Georgian government, install a pro-West government that would instigate open a second front, ostensibly in the cause of, taking back Abkhazia, a breakaway province, taking back South Ossetia, another province. Both of them were stripped away from Georgia back in the early 1990s in civil war. They were backed by the Russians, and many Georgians are bitter to Russia about this. They blame Russia for the loss of these. That's why it's sort of interesting that people say, well, these Georgians are, pro-Russian. Well, no, not really. They're not anti-Russian. They didn't go along with the sanctions, which is a point of bitterness in the United States. But while Europe's economy was falling apart, Georgia's economy was growing, 10, 11, 12% per year. Why? Because they weren't involved in sanctions. They were engaged in normal economic intercourse with the Russians, and they were succeeding. Georgia doesn't want to be the enemy of Russia. Georgia would like to be a member of the European Union, but they don't want to be an enemy of Russia. But the United States and NATO wants Georgia to be an enemy of Russia. And so we've been in there, playing, trying to disrupt Georgian democracy. I bring this up because the European Union and NATO are supposed to be, the political and military arms of this European democracy that's operating in concert with the United States. But what we're seeing is that European democracy doesn't exist, that Europe has allowed itself to be hijacked by this European identity that isn't about democracy, it's about European hegemony. But it's not European hegemony, it's about being an extension of American hegemony, selling out everything Europe stands for the sole benefit of the United States. And this is the reality that Europe faces. I said when Mark Rutte, the current Secretary General of NATO, was appointed in the fall of this year, I think in October, he took over from Stoltenberg. I said Rutte will probably be the last Secretary General of NATO, because I don't think NATO survives another 5 years. I think we're seeing some fatal damage being done to NATO. And if Germany, the Scholz government has collapsed, if Alternative for Deutschland comes in, you're going to see them. They talked about withdrawing from the European Union. If Germany withdraws from the European Union collapses like a house of cards. As it goes, so goes NATO. Europe's in a huge crisis situation, and I think Trump would just as soon get the hell out of there and not get bogged down in that.
But Scott, how could you say that NATO is in a crisis situation when those who joined NATO not too long ago in 2023, Sweden and Finland, they are preparing land for additional graveyard space as they prepare in preparation for a war with, guess who, Russia. So Scott, how is it, pardon my sarcasm here, but how is it that NATO is in crisis when you have these new members preparing the way for a war with Russia?
Well, I mean, you can prepare for a war, but can you fight a war? Neither Finland nor Sweden is ready to fight a high-intensity conflict with a peer-level opponent like Russia. They're incapable of sustaining the casualties that will be inflicted on them. And that's right. But the good news is that Russia doesn't want a war with either Finland or Sweden. Russia is looking for making a neutral Ukraine, and then putting those draft treaties back on the table and saying, we want a European security framework. The other interesting thing is that part of the underlining concept of this new European security framework is that NATO withdraws its military infrastructure back to its 1997 lines. Well, guess what happens to Finland and Sweden when that happens? All these military bases, all these NATO bases Finland once built on its soil aren't going to exist. Finland will be left alone. The same thing with Sweden. And suddenly they're going to realize that this NATO membership idea was a horrible idea, just an absolute disaster of an idea. And eventually you're going to see them withdraw from NATO. As like I said, I don't see NATO lasting much longer. When Trump has said and J.D. Vance is his vice president, they both said, we're not married to NATO. We're not going to, whatever NATO becomes, it'll be different than what it is now, because we, the United States, are no longer going to be taking the lead in funding and making this work. If NATO is going to be anything, Europe has to pay for it, and Europe can't pay for it. Then come up with the Germans. Schultz promised 100 billion euros early on in this conflict in 2022. He said Germany has to rebuild its military. We're going to spend 100 billion euros to build up the German military capabilities. So Germany is now the heart of NATO. He spent that, but in the last year's budget, 2023 budget or 2024 budget, it was all gone. And they hadn't accomplished any of the things they wanted to accomplish. It was all gone. And yet now the military is saying, well, we have to do this expansion. For instance, one of the projects was to put a German brigade in Lithuania. Right now, Germany has a battalion there that together with sort of this amalgam battalion of other NATO forces that are part of this battle group, NATO battle group, in the Baltics and in Poland. There's, I think, 4 separate battle groups. And Germany has the Lithuanian lead. Germany is creating a brigade now. They're going to expand this battalion into a brigade, which means they have to create new units. Now, the interesting thing is the German Constitution prohibits German soldiers from being permanently stationed outside of Germany unless the soldiers volunteer for this and say, we want to do that. So they have to recruit soldiers specifically for this new brigade. It doesn't look like they're able to recruit those. We'll see what happens. But right now, it's not looking like they can even recruit the soldiers. But even if they get the soldiers, they need to build, they equip 2 battalions. They have to buy brand new equipment, and they can't make this equipment. Their factories are unable to produce this equipment. So this dream of a German brigade forming up in Lithuania, they can't do it. But moreover, the German defense minister, Pistorius, I believe his name is, he asked for, a certain budget size that was, necessary to keep what the German military had and allow for some growth. What Parliament gave him was a budget that was less than inflation, which means that the German military has to shrink. So instead of expanding, the German military has to shrink. They have to start shedding off additional capabilities. This is the reality of Germany's military budget going forward. They don't have the money because of this collapsed economy to build this gigantic military. And so, the German military, the British, their military is in a huge crisis right now. I've joked about this before, but it's become even more apparent. You could take the totality of the British army, put them into, Manchester United Stadium, and have 30,000 unsold seats because the British military, and it's shrinking and shrinking. And the other thing that's happening with the British is that the quality of the manpower going in is subpar. There was a horrible report about the German Navy and what happens on submarines. But that's what happens when you recruit the dregs of society. no normal person wants to join the British military anymore. The call for patriotism just isn't there anymore. And so you have to lower your standards, lower your standards, lower your standards, and what you get is crap. And the British military is crap from head to toe. The equipment is insufficient to the task, doesn't work. They don't have enough manpower. The Brits talk about, we're going to send a brigade. They don't have a brigade to send. That's just the fact. It's the same thing. The French military is going through similar problems. They were talking about sending, 60, 70,000 troops to Ukraine, but they would have to deploy them and push them through a port in Romania into Ukraine. In 2022, 2023, the French military did a major logistics exercise that moved 12,000 men, and they couldn't do it. I mean, it was a strain on them to do it. And that's in a peacetime exercise. How do you now say you're going to take this system that could barely get 12,000 men moved from point A to point B, and suddenly you're going to expand it and make it send 60,000 troops? And where are those 60,000 troops coming from? France doesn't have 60,000 combat-ready troops to go. This is the reality of all of Europe. None of these militaries have combat-capable forces. They look good on paper, but look at the German Air Force. Look at the operational readiness rate of their aircraft. The vast majority of the aircraft are hangar queens that haven't been flown because they don't have spare parts, because they're not properly maintained. So the numbers look good on paper, but in reality, when you start taking a look at what can actually fly, what can actually drive, these numbers are significantly reduced. And so the idea that Europe is going to find 75 to 100,000, European soldiers ready to surge into Ukraine to serve as peacekeepers, which is one of the things that Trump was talking about, is a joke, because they don't exist. There's men on paper, but the resources for a truly expeditionary force, they don't exist. They can't logistically sustain them. They need the United States to help. And Trump is just saying, this is not what we're going to be doing.